The millionaire sent 50 invitations. Nobody wanted his Christmas, until the 21-year-old virgin appears in a simple dress. She hands him a letter. "I accepted because you need to know this." And upon reading it, the millionaire falls to his knees, unable to speak. What do you think will happen in this story? Comment and don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching us from. I promise this will be the best story you'll ever hear. The mansion stood imposingly on the tree-lined street of Belgravia, in London, like a silent fortress amidst the hustle and bustle of the city that never stopped. Its high walls, covered by decades-old ivy, seemed to protect not just an inheritance, but also a secret few dared to uncover. Behind those wrought-iron gates lived a man whose story was known only through the rumors circulating among neighbors and the brief glimpses the social press still insisted on capturing, always from afar, always without success. Robert Ashworth was 53 years old and carried on his shoulders the weight of an inherited fortune that, instead of liberating him, had become his most elaborate prison. Tall, with an elegant bearing even, on mornings when he wore only a silk robe over linen trousers, he kept his grey hair neatly trimmed and his beard precisely shaved. His brown eyes, however, revealed something no tailor or barber could disguise, a deep sadness, cultivated over years of disappointments and losses that money had never been able to compensate. On that December morning, 3 days before Christmas, Robert woke as he always did, alone, in a room that looked more like a private museum than a resting place. The heavy wine-colored velvet curtains blocked almost all natural light, and he had to press the remote control button for them to open slowly, revealing the impeccably maintained garden that stretched as far as the eye could see. The lawn was green and manicured, the rose bushes in full bloom, and the swimming pool sparkled under the London summer sun. Everything perfect, everything empty. He rose from the king-sized bed, whose Egyptian cotton sheets cost more than many people earned in a month, and walked to the Carrara marble bathroom. His morning routine always followed the same ritual: a long bath, strong coffee prepared by the housekeeper, reading the newspapers on the second-floor balcony. But that morning, something was different. There was an unusual commotion coming from downstairs, muffled voices echoing through the main hall. Robert frowned. He descended the noble wooden stairs, each step creaking slightly under his bare feet, and found Benedict, his butler, and the only employee who had remained in the house for over 30 years, talking in a low tone with Rose, the housekeeper. Both turned upon noticing his presence, and Benedict's expression revealed something between apprehension and determination. Benedict was a man of 68, of medium height, with completely white hair and calloused hands that told the story of a lifetime, dedicated to work. He had kind eyes, always moist as if on the verge of emotion, and a posture stooped by time but never by dignity. He wore his impeccably pressed black suit, even in that pre-holiday heat, and held something in his hands that Robert couldn't immediately identify. "Mr. Ashworth, I need to speak with you," Benedict said, his voice trembling but firm. "It's about Christmas." Robert sighed. Every year it was the same conversation. Benedict insisted on organizing some celebration, on inviting people, on bringing life to that house that seemed to have forgotten what joy was. And every year Robert refused, sometimes gently, sometimes sharply, depending on how much his patience was being tested. "Benedict, we've talked about this," Robert replied, walking towards the dining room where his breakfast was already served. "I don't want celebrations, I don't want visitors. I just want things to remain as they always have been." But Benedict didn't move. Rose looked at the old butler with admiration and apprehension, as if witnessing an act of courage she would never possess. The silence that settled was heavy, laden with everything that had gone unsaid over 3 decades of living together. "Mr. Ashworth," Benedict finally said, taking a step forward, "forgive my audacity, but I did something I perhaps shouldn't have, and now I must tell you, because it wouldn't be fair for you to discover it otherwise." Robert stopped. He turned slowly, his face hardening. "What did you do, Benedict?" The butler took a deep breath. "I sent invitations. 50 invitations to people in the city. Ordinary people who don't know who you are, who have no interest in your fortune. I invited them for a Christmas dinner here at the house. I only wrote that if they came, something in there. Lives would change. Nothing more than that. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert felt the blood rush to his face, anger mixed with something he couldn't name. Betrayal? Disappointment? Or perhaps a deep fear that his carefully constructed solitude was about to be invaded. "You did what?" Robert's voice came out louder than he intended. "How dare you make such a decision without my permission? This is my house, Benedict, my life. You have no right to interfere in this way." "I know, sir, and I accept any consequence, but I couldn't stand by and watch you waste away in this solitude any longer. You don't live, Mr. Ashworth, you merely exist, and that is no life, not for anyone." Robert felt the words hit something deep inside him, a place he had tried to keep locked away for years. But anger still dominated. "Cancel everything now, send messages, call, do whatever is necessary. I don't want anyone here for Christmas, understood?" "I can't cancel, sir," Benedict replied softly. "I didn't put a contact number or a return address. The invitations were anonymous. Whoever wants to come will come. Whoever doesn't won't. It's that simple." Robert ran a hand over his face, feeling frustration grow. "Then no one will come. People don't accept anonymous invitations from strangers, especially these days. They'll think it's a scam, a fraud, anything but a legitimate invitation." "Perhaps you're right," Benedict agreed. "But perhaps, just perhaps, someone has enough faith to believe that good things can still happen without explanation." Robert didn't reply. He merely turned his back and went back up to his room, slamming the door hard enough to echo through the mansion. But alone in that immense space, sitting on the edge of the bed, he couldn't contain the strange feeling that had settled in his chest. It wasn't just anger, it was also a deep fear that Benedict was right, that he truly merely existed without living, and that perhaps, just perhaps, it was too late to change that. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, in the East End of London, in a neighbourhood where houses were squeezed against each other and the sound of street vendors mixed with the noise of the train passing every hour, Marina Stewart woke up to another day of struggle. Her rented room at the back of a house belonging to a lady who collected rent promptly on the 5th of each month was small but organised, with the meticulousness of someone who valued every inch earned. Marina was 21 years old and possessed a discreet beauty she herself didn't recognise. Long brown hair always tied in a practical ponytail, dark eyes that carried a seriousness beyond her age, and a rare but genuine smile that lit up her face when it appeared. She was thin, not by fashion, but by a busy life juggling 3 different jobs that barely paid enough for basic bills. She got up from the thin mattress, laid directly on the floor, still unable to buy a real bed, and looked out the small window that overlooked the main house's backyard. The day was hot, typical of London in December, and she already knew it would be long. Work at the coffee shop from morning until mid-afternoon, then a few hours as a sales assistant at a clothing store on Brick Lane Market, and perhaps, if she was lucky, she could still do some app deliveries at night to supplement her income. Marina took a quick shower in cold water, not by choice but for economy put, on the least faded pair of jeans and the white blouse she wore to work at the coffee shop, and left without making a sound so as not to wake Mrs. Nelson, the landlady. In the shared kitchen she prepared weak coffee and grabbed the bread she had bought the day before, eating quickly while standing looking at the cheap watch on her wrist. As she opened her old synthetic leather bag to put away her wallet, she saw the crumpled envelope she had found days ago under her door. In the rush of routine she had forgotten about it. Now, with a few minutes to spare before catching the bus, she decided to open it again. The paper was of good quality, she noticed, unlike any advertisement or bill she usually received, and the message was strange, intriguing. "If you come, something in your life will change." Below, an address in Belgravia and a date, December 25th, 7 o'clock in the evening. Nothing else. No sender's name, no phone number, no explanations. Marina had shown it to some friends at work, and they all said the same thing: a scam, a trap, a waste of time. One of them even laughed, saying it was probably some cult or pyramid scheme disguised as a charity dinner. But something about that invitation stirred Marina in a way she couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the simplicity of the promise. It didn't say it would give money. It didn't promise a job or fortune. It just said something would change. And Marina, who for a long time hadn't felt that her life could take any direction different from the exhausting routine she lived, felt a pang of curiosity mixed with hope. She put the invitation back in her bag and went out to face another day. The bus was crowded as always, and she had to stand holding tight to the iron bar as the vehicle rattled on the potholed streets. She looked out the window without really seeing the landscape she knew by heart, thinking of her mother who had passed away 5 years ago, leaving her alone in the world. She thought of her childhood friends who drifted away when she had to work full-time and no longer had time for gatherings. She thought of the loneliness that was her most constant companion, even amidst the crowd of that giant city. Christmas had always been a difficult time for Marina. As she saw families gathering, decorated shop windows, advertisements showing hugs and smiles, she felt more invisible than ever. She had some acquaintances, but no one she could call a true friend. No one who invited her for a dinner, no one who asked how she really was. It was as if she were a ghost walking the streets, seen but never truly noticed. At the coffee shop she worked mechanically, serving coffees and sandwiches to hurried customers who barely looked at her face. Her boss, Mr. Walter, a grumpy but kind-hearted Portuguese man, noticed she was quieter than usual. "Hey, Marina, are you all right?" he asked during a break between orders. "You look like your head's somewhere else." Marina forced a smile. "I'm fine, Mr. Walter. Just tired." He didn't seem convinced, but didn't insist. "Look, on the night of the 24th we'll close early. You can take the 25th off if you want. I know you don't have family here, but if you want to come have lunch with us at home, the missus always makes too much food." The offer was kind, and Marina thanked him sincerely, but refused as she always refused such invitations. She didn't want to be anyone's charity project, the poor girl who needed to be taken in out of pity. She preferred her solitude to a compassion that made her feel even smaller. When her shift at the coffee shop ended, she went straight to the store in the Brick Lane market area, where she worked until nightfall folding clothes, serving customers, and enduring the grumpy manager who constantly complained about everything and everyone. At the end of the day, with aching feet and an exhausted body, Marina took the bus back home, once again standing, once again invisible amidst the crowd. It was only when she arrived at her small room and threw herself onto the mattress that she remembered the invitation again. She took it out of her bag and stared at it, turning it over and over, as if she could find some hidden clue on the paper. December 25th, 3 days from now. In Belgravia, a neighborhood she only knew from passing by on the bus, looking out the window at the enormous houses and wondering what it would be like to live that way. What did she have? To lose? In the worst case, it would be a scam or a waste of time, and she would return home with nothing. But at least she would have tried. At least she would have given a chance to that tiny spark of hope that still glowed in some corner of her chest, refusing to be completely extinguished. Marina picked up her old cell phone and searched for the address. It was a well-known upscale street, full of mansions. She used the map app to see how long it would take by public transport, almost 2 hours. She would have to leave early if she wanted to arrive on time. She thought about giving up immediately, but something stronger stopped her. Perhaps it was the weariness of always living the same way. Perhaps it was the memory of her mother, who always said that life had strange ways of surprising you when you least expected it. Perhaps it was just that desperate human desire to believe that good things could still happen, even when all evidence pointed to the contrary. Marina carefully put the invitation inside the only book she owned, a battered edition of short stories her mother had given her years ago. And that night, before falling asleep, she allowed herself to imagine, just for a moment, that perhaps something really could change. That perhaps that piece of paper was more than it seemed. That perhaps, just perhaps, she wasn't as alone as she thought. While Marina fell asleep with these musings on the other side of the city, Robert Ashworth remained awake in his private library, surrounded by thousands of books he no longer read. He held a glass of expensive whiskey that tasted of nothing, looking at the flames in the fireplace that didn't warm the coldness he felt inside. He thought of Benedict's words. He thought of how he had become that bitter man he no longer recognized. He remembered the boy he once was, before the losses, before money became more important than people, before building walls so high that not even he could see beyond them anymore. His uncle, from whom he inherited most of his fortune, was a hard, calculating man who had lived his entire life believing that affection was weakness and solitude was strength. Robert swore he would never be like him. But here he was, 53 years later, alone, in a huge mansion, with no one to share either joy or sorrow, because both had lost their meaning long ago. The clause in the will that the lawyer had mentioned months ago came back to his mind. His uncle had been cruel even after death, imposing absurd conditions for Robert to receive the final part of the inheritance, to spend Christmas completely alone, without visitors, without celebrations, as a way to prove that he had learned the lesson of not depending on anyone. Robert had laughed bitterly when he heard that. Prove what? He had been living like this for years. Solitude was not a new punishment, it was his reality. But now, with the possibility of strangers invading his house, the clause took on a different weight. If someone actually showed up, if some naive or desperate soul accepted that mysterious invitation, he would lose a significant part of the money, and a part of him, the proud part that still resisted, didn't want to give his dead uncle that satisfaction. He didn't want to prove he was weak, that he needed company, that solitude had, after all, too high a price. Robert finished the whiskey and poured another glass. Tomorrow he would talk seriously with Benedict. Perhaps he would fire him, perhaps he would just reprimand him harshly, or perhaps, in a silent corner of his soul, he would thank him for someone still caring enough to try to save him from himself. The night advanced, and the mansion remained silent as always. But something had changed in the air, an invisible expectation that neither Robert nor Marina could name, but both felt. It was as if destiny was preparing an unlikely encounter between two lost souls, each in their particular kind of prison, each carrying their own wounds and secret hopes. The next morning, 2 days before Christmas, Benedict woke before dawn, as was his custom. He went down to the kitchen, prepared coffee, and began organizing the preparations for the possible dinner. Rose tried to dissuade him, saying that Mr. Ashworth was furious, and that probably no one would come anyway. But the old butler remained firm in his decision. He had his reasons, kept like a precious secret in his heart. He had met Robert when he was just a 10-year-old boy, motherless, living with a father who worked too much and talked too little. He had seen the boy gradually close himself off, build ever higher defenses until he became a man who let no one in. And throughout all those years, Benedict had remained there, faithful, silent, waiting for the right moment to act. That Christmas seemed to be the moment. Benedict didn't know if anyone would come, but he had faith. Faith that somewhere in that immense city, someone also needed a small, silent miracle. And faith that when two needs met, something greater than both could be born. He set the large dining room table, the one that was, never used, and began to arrange it as if 50 people were indeed going to appear. Impeccable white tablecloth, fine china that had been stored for decades, crystal glasses that reflected the light of the chandelier like small diamonds. Rose looked at everything with a mixture of admiration and sadness, imagining that enormous empty table, a monument to frustrated hope. But Benedict smiled as he worked, because he knew something no one else knew, that sometimes just one person was enough, just one, to start to change everything. Christmas Eve dawned with a sky heavy with dark clouds that threatened rain at any moment. Marina woke earlier than usual, her heart beating at a rapid pace she couldn't control. She had made the decision during the night, after hours of tossing and turning on the thin mattress, debating with herself whether it was madness or courage to accept that mysterious invitation. She got up and looked at the small makeshift wardrobe made of market crates she had painted white. All her clothes fit there, and none seemed suitable for a dinner in a Belgravia mansion. She ran her hands over the few pieces she owned, feeling the worn fabric, the seams she herself had mended several times. She had a simple navy blue dress that her mother had given her years ago, and that she kept for special occasions that never came. It was the only option that made any sense. Marina worked normally at the coffee shop during the morning, But Mr. Walter noticed she was different. There was something in her eyes, a mixture of nervousness and determination he hadn't seen in a long time. When the movement slowed down around noon, he approached the counter where she was cleaning the espresso machine. "Are you doing anything tonight?" he asked with the delicacy of someone who truly cared. "Because if you are, you can leave early. Today will be a slow day anyway. Everyone's already on holiday." Marina hesitated, but eventually accepted. She thanked him with a shy smile, and as soon as her shift ended, rushed back home. She had a few hours to get ready and catch the necessary buses to cross the city. The rain had held off, but the sky remained threatening, and she hoped it wouldn't start pouring right now. In her small room, she showered carefully, washed her hair with the cheap shampoo she bought at the corner shop, and tried to do something different with it. She let her hair down, which she always tied up, and allowed it to fall naturally over her shoulders. She applied the only makeup she had, a discreet lipstick she had received as a birthday gift from a colleague, and put on the navy blue dress that was a little loose but still fit her well. She looked at herself in the broken mirror hanging on the wall and almost didn't recognize herself. She looked like another person, someone who could belong to a different world from the one she lived in. For a moment she felt ridiculous. Who did she think she was, getting dressed up to go to a mansion, responding to an anonymous invitation as if she were a fairy tale princess? But then she remembered her mother's words, spoken so many times when she was little. "Never be ashamed to try, my daughter, because the greater shame is to give up before you start." Marina picked up her old bag, put the crumpled invitation inside it as if it were a pass to another world, and left. Mrs. Nelson was watering the plants in the backyard and looked up surprised to see her dressed like that. "Oh, Marina, how lovely. Are you going somewhere special?" "I'm visiting an acquaintance," Marina lied awkwardly. "Just a quick thing." Mrs. Nelson said with a mischievous smile. "Acquaintance or friend? Because you're too pretty for just a friend's visit." Marina felt her face flush but didn't reply. She merely waved and left quickly before her landlady's curiosity turned into a full interrogation. On the street, she caught the usual crowded first bus, but this time she didn't mind standing so much. She was too nervous to bother with small discomforts. As the bus crossed the city, Marina looked out the window, watching the landscape gradually change. The simple, cramped houses gave way to commercial buildings, then to wide avenues, and finally to tree-lined neighborhoods, where residences hid behind high walls and electronic gates. It was another world, so close geographically but so distant from the reality she knew. She got off the bus at the stop closest to the address and walked through the streets that seemed deserted on that holiday eve. Her simple shoes made a soft sound on the clean asphalt, and she felt that each step took her further from everything she knew. She finally reached the street indicated on the invitation and stopped in front of the wrought iron gate, her heart pounding. The mansion was even more imposing than she had imagined. The ivy-covered walls, the garden that stretched beyond what she could see, the enormous windows that reflected the grey sky. For a moment, Marina thought about turning back and leaving before anyone saw her there, clearly out of place. But then she remembered the invitation. If you come, something in your life will change. She had come. Now, she needed to find out what that meant. She took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. The sound echoed from the other side of the wall, and she waited, her hands sweating despite the cool weather. Almost a minute passed until she heard footsteps approaching. The gate opened slowly, and Marina found herself before a tall, elegant man with grey hair and a surprised look that quickly turned to confusion. Robert Ashworth didn't expect anyone. He was sure Benedict's insane plan would come to nothing, that no soul would be naive or desperate enough to accept an anonymous invitation. But there she was, a young woman in a navy blue dress, holding an old bag with both hands, looking at him with a mixture of nervousness and determination that caught him completely off guard. "Good evening," Marina said, her voice coming out softer than she intended. "I received an invitation for a dinner tonight. Is this the right address?" Robert stood still for a moment that seemed eternal, trying to process what was happening. Then he remembered Benedict's damned invitations. Someone had actually come, someone had believed. And now she was there, at his door, waiting to be received, while he had no idea what to do. "An invitation," he repeated, his voice coming out harsher than he intended. "May I see it?" Marina took the crumpled paper from her bag and handed it to him. Robert immediately recognized Benedict's handwriting, that careful, cursive script the butler used for shopping lists and notes. He felt a mixture of anger and something else he couldn't name. Perhaps admiration for her audacity in accepting. Perhaps respect for someone who still had the courage to believe in mysterious promises. "Come in," he finally said, stepping aside to open the gate completely. "But I need to be honest with you. This invitation was not sent by me. It was the initiative of a well-meaning but inconvenient employee. I don't know what he promised, but I can assure you there's nothing special waiting for you here." Marina felt her heart sink. It was exactly what her friends had said. A mistake, a misunderstanding, a waste of time. But she was already there, and something in her refused to simply leave without at least understanding what was happening. She entered slowly, following Robert along the stone path that led to the main house, the mansion. Inside was even more impressive. The entrance hall had a very high ceiling, with a crystal chandelier hanging from it like a cascade of light. The walls were decorated with paintings that looked old and valuable, and the marble floor shone as if it had just been polished. Marina felt completely out of place in that environment, like an ink stain on a perfect painting. It was then that Benedict appeared, coming from the kitchen, and his face lit up upon seeing Marina. The old butler seemed on the verge of tears of emotion, and Marina realized that this man was in fact the one who had sent the invitations. He approached quickly, his hands trembling. "You came, miss," Benedict said, his voice choked. "You really came. I wasn't sure if anyone would come, but you are here. That means a lot. A lot indeed." Robert watched the scene with an expression that oscillated between irritation and something akin to tenderness. He saw Benedict, who had served him faithfully for 3 decades, emotional like a child over something as simple as someone having accepted an invitation. And he saw that unknown young woman, clearly nervous, clearly out of her element, but present. She had come. "Benedict," Robert said firmly but not sharply, "can you leave us alone for a moment?" The butler hesitated, but obeyed, returning to the kitchen after casting one last hopeful glance at Marina. Robert then turned to her, and for the first time their eyes truly met. He saw in her something that touched him, a vulnerability he recognized because he carried it within himself, hidden beneath layers of cynicism and protection. "Please, sit down," Robert said, gesturing to one of the sofas in the living room. "I think I need to explain a few things. And you also need to tell me why, in the name of all that is sensible, you accepted an anonymous invitation from a stranger." Marina sat on the edge of the sofa, her back straight, her hands still holding her bag in her lap like a shield. Robert sat in an armchair opposite her, maintaining a respectful distance, and for the first time in years, he found himself truly looking at someone, trying to see beyond the surface. "My name is Robert Ashworth," he began. "This house has belonged to my family for generations. I live here alone with few employees. Benedict, the man you just saw, has been with me since I was a child. He has a huge heart, and sometimes too much heart is dangerous. He sent 50 invitations around the city without my permission, believing that he could, in some way, bring life to this dead house. Clearly, you were the only person foolish enough to believe him." The words came out harsher than Robert intended, and he saw Marina flinch slightly. He immediately regretted it. This young woman was not to blame for anything. She was there out of pure faith or desperation, and he was being cruel for no reason. "I'm sorry," Robert said, running a hand over his face. "I didn't mean to be rude. It's just that this situation caught me by surprise. I wasn't expecting anyone. And now you're here, and I don't know what to do with that." Marina finally found her voice. "My name is Marina Stewart. I work in a coffee shop and a store. I live alone in a rented room in the East End. When I received the invitation, I thought it was crazy. Everyone said it was crazy. But I came anyway because," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "because nothing different has happened in my life for a very long time. And even if it's just a weird dinner with a grumpy stranger, it's still different. It's still something." Robert was silent for a moment, processing her words. There was a brutal honesty in that confession, a courage he hadn't seen in himself for decades. She was right to call him grumpy, and she had more courage than he ever would to admit her own loneliness with such clarity. Before he could reply, Benedict appeared again at the living room door, this time with Rose by his side. Both looked apprehensive but determined. The old butler cleared his throat to get their attention. "Mr. Ashworth, dinner is ready. We have set the table for 50 people as planned. Obviously, we have much more food than necessary for 2, but it would be an honor if you both dined together." "After all," he said, looking at Marina with a gentle smile, "you came all this way, miss. It would be unfair to send you away hungry." Robert was about to refuse, to say that it was all absurd and that it would be best to call a driver to take Marina home. But then he looked at her again and saw something in her eyes that made him hesitate. It wasn't an expectation of luxury or advantage. It was just the simple hope of not spending another Christmas Eve completely alone. And he who planned to spend that night exactly like that, alone with his bitterness and his expensive whiskey, suddenly couldn't say no. "All right," Robert said, surprising himself. "Let's have dinner. But," looking at Benedict sternly, "tomorrow we will talk about boundaries and respect for other people's decisions. Understood?" Benedict nodded enthusiastically, his eyes shining with unshed tears, and practically ran back to the kitchen to put the finishing touches on dinner. Rose followed behind him, but not before casting a look of approval and relief at Robert. Marina was motionless on the sofa, still processing the fact that this was actually happening. She was going to have dinner in a mansion, with a man who clearly didn't want company, but who, for some reason she didn't understand, had accepted her presence. It was surreal, absurd, and at the same time the most interesting thing that had happened to her in years. "Before we go to the dining room," Robert said, standing up, "can I offer you something to drink? Wine, juice, water?" "Water is fine, thank you," Marina replied, also standing. Robert went to a discreet bar in the corner of the room and returned with a glass of cold water for her, and another glass of whiskey for himself. He held out the water and she accepted, noticing how her hands trembled slightly. "You're nervous," Robert observed. "You don't need to be. I don't bite. At least not before the second course." It was an awkward attempt at a joke, but it worked. Marina let out a small giggle, and Robert realized he liked that sound. It had been a long time since he had heard laughter in that house. It had been a long time since he had seen a reason to provoke any kind of joy in anyone. They walked together to the dining room, and Marina stopped at the doorway, completely impressed by what she saw. The enormous table was impeccably set, with place settings for 50 people. Each place had its own set of fine china, crystal glasses, silver cutlery, and embroidered linen napkins. Candles were lit, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the size of the room, and an arrangement of fresh flowers occupied the center of the table. But what truly touched Marina was the realization of it all. All that preparation, all that work, for 50 people who hadn't come. And in the middle of that enormous table, 2 places had been rearranged to be close to each other. It was melancholic and beautiful at the same time, a monument to frustrated hope and the resilience to keep trying anyway. "It's a lot of food for 2 people, Marina commented softly. "It is," Robert agreed. "But Benedict is stubborn. When he decides to do something, he does it properly, even if it's completely unnecessary." They sat in the indicated places, facing each other in a corner of the gigantic table. The rest of the empty seats stretched around them like ghosts of guests who never existed. Rose began to serve the appetizer, a creamy pumpkin soup with croutons and fresh herbs that smelled wonderfully. Marina picked up the silver spoon, heavy and cold in her hand, and tasted the soup. It was delicious, probably the best thing she had ever eaten in her life, but it also had a strange taste, the taste of guilt for being there, enjoying a luxury that was not hers while Benedict and Rose worked to serve a dinner that no one else wanted. "You don't need to be uncomfortable," Robert said, as if reading her thoughts. "Benedict did this because he wanted to, and now that you're here, the least I can do is make sure the evening isn't a complete disaster. So, Marina Stewart from the East End, tell me about yourself. What makes a young woman in her 20s crossed the entire city on Christmas Eve to accept an invitation from a stranger. Marina put the spoon back on the plate, thinking about how to answer. She could lie, invent a more interesting or less pathetic story than the truth. But something in that man, in his own poorly disguised vulnerability, made her choose honesty. "I came because I'm alone," she said simply, "and because I'm tired of pretending I don't care about it. Everyone says it's good to be independent, that not needing anyone is a strength. But sometimes it's just loneliness without a pretty disguise. When I saw that invitation, even though I thought it might be dangerous or foolish, I thought it was worth the risk. Because the alternative was to spend another night alone, pretending everything was fine." The words hung in the air between them, raw and true. Robert felt something stir within his chest, something that had been dormant for so long that he had forgotten it existed. Recognition. She had just described exactly what he felt but never admitted. "I understand," Robert said softly, "more than you imagine." And then, for the first time in decades, Robert Ashworth began to talk about himself, not about business or investments, not about fortune or the mansion, but about the boy who lost his mother too early, about the father who worked so much he forgot to be a father, about the uncle who raised him with discipline but without affection. He spoke about how money had come into his life as both a blessing and a curse, attracting people who wanted his assets, but never him personally. Marina listened in silence, realizing that this man who seemed to have everything was, in fact, as lost as she was. Rich in money, poor in real connections, surrounded by luxury, hungry for authenticity. And, for some reason neither of them completely understood, they were there on that unlikely night, sharing not just a meal, but also their most guarded truths. Dinner continued with conversations that flowed more naturally than they expected. Robert told stories from the past with self-deprecating humor that made Marina smile, and she gradually loosened up, talking about her job at the coffee shop, about the funny customers she served, about her plans to someday take a technical course and perhaps have a different life. Benedict and Rose served the dishes in silence, but both exchanged meaningful glances in the kitchen. Something was happening there in that dining room, something delicate and important that they feared breaking with any unnecessary interruption. When they reached dessert, a milk pudding with caramel sauce that Rose had made with special care, the conversation had taken a deeper turn. Robert spoke about the loneliness that no one saw, the one disguised as choice and independence. Marina spoke about her fears, about how sometimes she thought she would be alone forever, invisible among millions of people. "You know," Robert said, looking at the pudding without really seeing it, "there's a clause in my uncle's will. To receive the final part of the inheritance, I have to spend this Christmas completely alone. No visitors, no celebrations. It's his way of punishing what he called my emotional weakness. Ironic, isn't it? He died alone and bitter, and he wants to make sure I follow the same path." Marina felt a chill in her stomach. "So my being here, you'll lose money because of it?" Robert shrugged. "Probably. But you know what? Right now, I don't care as much as I should. The money has always been there. But an honest conversation, someone who looks at me and sees a person instead of a bank account, that's rare. And perhaps it's worth more than any inheritance." They looked at each other then, truly looked, and something passed between them. It wasn't romance, not yet. It was something simpler and perhaps more important. Mutual recognition of two souls who met at the right moment, when both most needed a reminder that they weren't as alone as they thought. The rain began as a distant whisper, scattered drops gently hitting the dining room windows. Marina and Robert barely noticed at first, absorbed in the conversation that deepened with each passing minute. But then the sound intensified, turning into a constant drumming that quickly evolved into a furious storm. The sky, which had been heavy since morning, finally unleashed its full force, bringing with it lightning that illuminated the garden in sudden flashes and thunder that made the crystal glasses vibrate on the table. Marina looked out the window and felt her heart tighten. She knew that type of London downpour well, the kind that came with strong winds and could last for hours. Her chances of catching a bus or any public transport in those conditions were practically nil, and even If she did, it would be dangerous. The city streets turned into rivers during such storms, and she had no way of knowing if the way back would be passable. Robert noticed her concern. He followed her gaze to the window and immediately understood the situation. For a moment he was silent, mentally calculating his options. He could call a private driver to take her, but it would be irresponsible to send her away in the middle of that storm. He could pay for a taxi, but the same problem applied. The most sensible option, also the most complicated given the circumstances, would be to offer her to stay until the storm passed. "Marina," he said, choosing his words carefully, "I don't think it's wise for you to leave now. This storm could last for hours, and the streets must be flooding. If you wish, you can stay here until it improves. I have spare rooms, all with doors that lock from the inside, and you have my word that you will be treated with complete respect." The proposal caught Marina off guard. Stay there? Spend the night in a mansion with a man she had just met? All the basic safety rules she had learned in life said it was crazy. But at the same time, looking at Robert, seeing the sincerity in his eyes, feeling the genuine concern in his voice, she didn't feel fear. She felt only a strange sensation that in some inexplicable way she could trust him. "I don't want to cause any trouble," Marina said hesitantly. "It's already been a lot of intrusion for today. If the rain lessens a bit, I can try to go." "It's not an intrusion," Robert replied firmly, "and it would be imprudent of me to let you go. Out in this storm, besides," he added with a half-smile, "I've already lost the inheritance for having company at Christmas. At least let it be worth it." Marina returned the smile, still uncertain but beginning to be convinced. Benedict, who had appeared discreetly at the living room door upon hearing the sound of the storm, intervened with his gentle voice. "You should stay, miss, no doubt. I have already prepared the guest room on the second floor. It has a private bathroom, clean clothes in the closet that should fit, and everything you might need. The storm is very strong, and Mr. Ashworth is right. It would be dangerous to leave now." Robert cast a grateful look at the old butler. Benedict always knew what to do, how to ease difficult situations without making a fuss. Marina took a deep breath and nodded, accepting the offer that made sense even though it was completely outside her comfort zone. "All right, thank you. I'll stay until the rain passes." The decision made brought a strange relief to both of them. Robert rose from the table and indicated the way. "I'll show you where the room is. If you need anything during the night, my room is at the end of the corridor. You can knock without hesitation." They ascended the wide staircase, the steps covered by an ancient Persian carpet that muffled the sound of their footsteps. Marina observed everything with discreet curiosity, the paintings on the walls that seemed to be by important artists, the furniture that clearly had decades of history, the sense of weight and tradition that each object carried. It was a world completely different from hers, where things were cheap and replaceable, where nothing had history beyond the daily struggle for survival. Robert opened the door to one of the rooms and turned on the light. Marina entered and had to control her gasp of surprise. The room was larger than her entire rented space. It had a huge, king-sized bed with a canopy, an antique dressing table with a mirror, 2 comfortable armchairs next to a bookshelf filled with books, and a door that led to the private bathroom. Everything was tastefully decorated, in shades of beige and white that conveyed a discreet elegance. "Benedict left some clothes in the closet that should fit," Robert said, pointing to the dark wooden wardrobe. "They're new things, some. Pieces that were ordered for a niece who never came to pick them up. Use whatever you need. Towels are in the bathroom. And if you want to take a bath, feel free." Marina turned to him, and their eyes met. "Thank you. For everything. For dinner, for shelter, for not making me feel like an intruder. I know none of this was what you planned for today." Robert shrugged, but there was something different in his face, a softness that wasn't there at the beginning of the night. Plans change, sometimes for the better even when we don't realize it at the time. "Rest, Marina, and don't worry about anything. You are safe here." He left, closing the door softly, and Marina was left alone in that room that seemed straight out of a movie. She sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the softness of the mattress, so different from the thin mattress on the floor where she slept every night. She looked around, still processing everything that had happened on that surreal day. She had left her small room in the East End that morning without imagining that she would spend the night in a Belgravia mansion, having dinner with a lonely millionaire who kept his own wounds hidden behind a facade of elegance and control. Marina got up and opened the wardrobe. She found several pieces of women's clothing, all still with tags, in varied sizes. She chose a simple cotton nightgown and also picked up a plush bathrobe that was hanging there. She entered the bathroom and almost laughed at her own reaction. It was larger than her kitchen and bathroom combined. It had an enormous bathtub, a glass shower stall that seemed to have 1,000 different functions, and all kinds of toiletries. Lined up on the marble shelves, she took a long bath, letting the warm water relax her muscles tense from the day's journey. She used a lavender-scented soap and a shampoo that left her hair softer than it had ever been. When she came out, she wrapped herself in the bathrobe and looked at herself in the steamed mirror. She looked like another person, not because of the expensive clothes or luxury products, but because of something in her eyes, an openness, a vulnerability she didn't usually allow. She put on the nightgown and bathrobe and returned to the room. The storm continued outside, perhaps even stronger. The thunder made the windows rattle, and lightning illuminated the sky in dramatic sequences. Marina lay down on the bed, sinking into the comfortable mattress, but found she couldn't sleep. She was physically tired, but her mind was too fast, processing every moment of that unforgettable night. After almost an hour of tossing and turning in bed, she gave up trying to sleep. She got up, put on a pair of soft slippers she found beside the bed, and decided to explore a little. The mansion was silent, only the sound of the rain echoing through the walls. A soft light came from the corridor, enough to guide her without her needing to turn on all the lights. She descended the stairs slowly, admiring again the details she hadn't noticed before. In the main hall, she stopped before an old black-and-white photograph framed in silver. It showed a family, a couple with a small boy between them. All serious, as was customary in old photographs, but there was something tender in the way the woman held the boy's hand. Marina imagined it was Robert as a child and felt a pang of sadness thinking about how that little boy had become the lonely man she had met today. She continued walking and reached the living room where an enormous Christmas tree had been set up. It was all decorated with ornaments that looked old, some hand-painted glass balls, red velvet ribbons, small porcelain angels. The lights twinkled softly, reflecting on the ornaments and creating a magical atmosphere. Marina approached, fascinated by the beauty of that symbol of celebration in a house that seemed to have forgotten what it was to celebrate. It was then that she noticed something at the foot of the tree. A wooden box was open, and inside it were more ornaments, these apparently stored and not used in the decoration. Marina knelt and began to look carefully, delicately touching each piece as if they were fragile treasures. There were ceramic snowmen, golden stars faded by time, and then her fingers touched something that made her heart stop. It was a small glass ornament, hand-painted with a snowy landscape design. It was shaped like a bell, delicate and antique, but what caught her attention was the base. It was broken, cracked in a specific pattern she recognized immediately. Marina picked up the ornament with both hands, feeling tears well up in her eyes, unable to control them. Her mother had an ornament exactly like it, identical, with the same painting, the same shape, even the same crack in the base. It was part of a limited collection her grandmother had bought decades ago, even before Marina was born. Her mother always told the story. There were only 12 pieces made by a Portuguese artisan who came to England in the 50s. Each bell was unique, but followed the same pattern, and the family had only managed to get one. It was hung on the tree every Christmas, and her mother said it brought protection and good memories. When her mother passed away, Marina couldn't take much with her. The ornament was one of the few things she kept, carefully stored in a box along with some photographs. And now, in a stranger's house on the other side of the city, she found another example of the same rare series. The probability was infinitesimal, almost impossible. And yet, there it was. "You can't sleep either." Robert's voice startled her. Marina turned quickly, still holding the ornament, and saw him, standing at the entrance to the room. He wore silk pajama bottoms and a simple t-shirt, his hair slightly disheveled, his feet bare. He looked more human like this, less polished and controlled, more real. "I'm sorry," Marina said, quickly placing the ornament back in the box. "I didn't mean to touch your things, it's just that I saw the tree and got curious." Robert approached, shaking his head. "No need to apologize. The house is open to you tonight, but I noticed something in your expression when you looked at that ornament. What was it?" Marina hesitated, but the emotion was too strong to hold back. She picked up the glass bell again and showed it to him. "This ornament. My mother had one just like it. Exactly the same, even the crack at the base. It was from a limited collection made by a Portuguese artisan in the 50s. Only 12 existed in the world. My mother always said it was special, that it brought good memories and protection." Robert stood completely still. He took the ornament from her hands and looked at it closely, as if seeing it for the first time, even though he had kept it in that box for years. "My mother also had this story," he said, his voice hoarse. "She said her father, my grandfather, bought it from a Portuguese artisan he met at Borough Market. There were 12 unique pieces, and he only managed to get one. My mother hung it every Christmas, saying it brought luck and kept the family together." They looked at each other, the glass bell between their hands, and something impossible to explain passed between them. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. In a city of millions of people, in a collection of only 12 pieces, made decades ago, 2 of those bells were connected to them. One in Robert's mother's hands, the other in Marina's mother's hands. And now, on that improbable night, they met. "This is," Marina began, but couldn't finish the sentence. "Impossible," Robert completed. "But it's happening." They stood there in silence, processing the magnitude of that moment. The storm outside seemed to have subsided a little, or perhaps they just weren't paying attention anymore. All that mattered was that small, cracked glass object that somehow connected 2 strangers from completely different worlds. Robert was the first to move. He carefully placed the bell back in the box and sat on the sofa near the tree. Marina followed him, sitting beside him, maintaining a respectful distance, but close enough for them to continue talking in low voices, as if they were afraid of breaking the spell of that moment. "Tell me about your mother," Robert asked. Marina felt tears threaten to return, but this time she let them come. "She was everything to me. Just the 2 of us against the world for as long as I can remember. My father was never present, so it was always just me and her. She worked as a seamstress, did odd jobs when she could, and even then she always made sure I had food and a place to sleep. She passed away when I was 16. It was quick. An illness no one expected. Suddenly she was there, and the next moment she was gone. I stopped being a child that day. I had to work, to fend for myself, and it was very difficult. It still is." Robert listened with absolute attention, and for the first time in decades he felt genuinely touched by another person's pain. It wasn't pity. It was empathy, recognition of a loss he also carried. "My mother also passed away when I was young," he said softly. "I was 10. I remember her as someone sweet, who tried to bring joy to a house that was very serious, very rigid. My father became even more distant afterward. He plunged into work and left me in the care of employees and then my uncle. I learned early that showing emotion was weakness, that asking for affection was pathetic. I built walls so high that I can't even get past them myself most days." Marina looked at him and saw not the rich man in his mansion, but the 10-year-old boy who lost his mother and never allowed himself to truly cry. She reached out hesitantly and lightly touched his arm. It was a simple gesture, but laden with understanding. Robert looked at that hand on his arm and felt something break inside him, a crack in the walls he had spent decades building. "You know what's saddest?" he asked. "I spent my whole life surrounded by people who wanted something from me. Money, status, connections. I was never sure if anyone truly saw me. And then you appear, a complete stranger who didn't know who I was, who came only because she believed in a vague promise of change. And in a few hours of conversation, I feel like you see me more clearly than people I've known my whole life." Marina felt her heart tighten. "I understand. It's strange, but I feel the same, as if somehow we were meant to meet." Not romantically necessarily, but as two people who needed to know they weren't alone in their struggles. They stayed there side by side, looking at the Christmas tree that shone softly in the dark. The sound of the rain had turned into a fine drizzle, and the sky was beginning to lighten very slightly on the horizon. Soon it would be Christmas morning, and there they were, two strangers who stopped being strangers in a single night, united by stories of loss, loneliness, and a small cracked glass bell that had traversed decades to bring them together. Robert got up and went to an old piece of furniture in the corner of the room. He opened a drawer and took something out. He returned and sat down again beside Marina, extending a small, worn leather-bound book to her. "It's my mother's diary," he explained. "She wrote in it for years. There's an entry here about the bell, about what it meant to her." Marina took the book with reverence and opened it to the page Robert indicated. The handwriting was delicate, feminine, and full of curves. It read, "Today, John gave me the most beautiful gift. A glass bell, hand-painted by an artisan he met at the market. He said there are only 12 in the world, and this one is ours. Our protection, our reminder that even in small and fragile things, there is beauty and strength. I want Robert to grow up knowing this, to learn to value not what is expensive, but what carries meaning." Tears ran freely down Marina's face now. "My mother said something similar, that the bell was special because it reminded us that the most important things were fragile, that they needed care, attention, that it wasn't perfection that mattered, but the story each crack told." Robert felt his own tears threaten to fall, something he hadn't allowed for years. Perhaps our mothers knew something we forgot. That fragility isn't weakness, that allowing oneself to be seen even with all the cracks is a form of courage. They looked at each other again, and this time they didn't look away. Something was forming between them, delicate as glass, strong as a silent promise. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become important. It was genuine connection, the first they had both experienced in years. It was the feeling that perhaps, just perhaps, they weren't destined to live alone forever. Marina returned the diary to Robert, and he carefully put it away. "It's almost dawn," he observed, "and it's officially Christmas. Not exactly how I planned to spend this day, but," he smiled slightly, "infinitely better than I expected." "For me too," Marina agreed, returning the smile. "I came here with no expectations, or perhaps afraid of having expectations, and I found something I didn't know I was looking for. It's not a grand miracle. It's just two people recognizing each other in each other's loneliness. But sometimes that's more than enough." They stayed there until the sun began to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. The storm had completely passed, leaving only wet streets and the fresh morning air. Marina knew that soon she would have to return to her reality, to her small rented room and her 3 jobs. Robert knew he would have to deal with the consequences of having lost the inheritance for not having spent Christmas alone. But at that moment neither of them thought about tomorrow. They thought only of the now, of the silent and comfortable company they had found in each other. When Marina finally went back up to the room, it was almost 6 in the morning. She lay down on the huge bed and this time fell asleep almost immediately, lulled by the strange and comforting feeling that something fundamental had changed in her life. She didn't know what exactly, or how, or what would happen next, but she knew that Christmas would be unforgettable, that improbable encounter would mark her life in ways she couldn't yet fully comprehend. In the next room, Robert also lay down, but stayed awake a little longer. He looked at the high ceiling of his room, thinking about everything that had happened since Marina rang the doorbell. He thought about how life had strange ways of surprising us when we least expected it. He thought about Benedict and his audacity in sending those invitations. He thought about the cracked glass bell and the impossible coincidence that united them, and for the first time in decades, Robert Ashworth fell asleep, smiling. Chapter 4. Marina woke to the soft morning light streaming through the bedroom window, warming her face with a gentleness that made her take a few seconds to remember where she was. When she opened her eyes completely, and saw the high ceiling decorated with plaster moldings. The reality of the previous night came back like a wave. The mansion Robert, the improbable dinner, the storm, the glass bell. Everything seemed part of a dream, one of those so vivid that they leave a person confused upon waking, unsure where fantasy ends and reality begins. She sat up in bed and looked around. The room was flooded with the golden light of Christmas morning. Outside, through the window, she could see the garden still wet from the previous night's rain, the leaves of the trees shining as if they had been washed and polished. The sky was completely clear now, an intense blue that contrasted violently with the furious storm of hours ago. It was as if nature itself was celebrating, offering a fresh start after the tempest. Marina got up and went to the bathroom. She washed her face, tried to fix her hair with her fingers, and again felt out of place in that luxurious environment. It was Christmas Day. She should go home, back to her routine, to her real world where there were no mansions or impossible encounters. But a part of her didn't want to leave yet. She wanted to prolong that moment suspended in time, where everything seemed different, where she felt seen and heard in a way she hadn't experienced in years. She put on the navy blue dress she had brought, carefully folded the borrowed nightgown, and made the bed, even though she knew someone would probably do it later. It was a habit, a way of showing respect for the space she had been offered. When she finished, she carefully opened the bedroom door and stepped out into the corridor. The mansion was silent, but there was a smell of fresh coffee coming from somewhere downstairs. Marina descended the stairs slowly, admiring again the details that the daylight revealed differently. The stained glass windows in the hall projected colorful patches on the marble floor, creating patterns that seemed to dance as she moved. It was beautiful in a way she had never imagined possible in a residence. She had always thought of mansions as cold and impersonal places, but this house had a soul, history, memories imbued in every piece of furniture and every painting. She followed the smell of coffee and found Rose in the kitchen, preparing breakfast. The housekeeper looked up and smiled when she saw her, a genuine and maternal smile that made Marina feel less like an intruder. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well? Did the storm not bother you too much?" "I slept very well, thank you," Marina replied, approaching shyly. "Better than I've slept in a long time, to be honest. Can I help with anything?" Rose chuckled softly. "You're a guest, darling. Sit down there and let me serve you. Mr. Ashworth hasn't come down yet. He must be in his study. He usually wakes up early and works a bit before breakfast. But today is Christmas, so perhaps he's just contemplating life." Marina sat on the high stool beside the granite counter and accepted the cup of coffee Rose offered her. The coffee was strong and aromatic, much better than what she prepared in her small room with cheap instant coffee. Rose placed a plate in front of her with warm French bread, butter, homemade strawberry jam, assorted cheeses and fresh fruits. It was a breakfast that looked like it came out of a magazine, and Marina had to remind herself to eat slowly, not to show how hungry she was. While she ate, Rose worked in the kitchen, preparing what seemed to be lunch. She took things out of the enormous refrigerator, seasoned, organized, and occasionally cast discreet glances at Marina, as if evaluating something. "May I ask an indiscreet question?" Rose suddenly said, stopping what she was doing. Marina nodded, curious. "What was a beautiful young woman like you doing alone on Christmas Eve, to the point of accepting a mysterious invitation from a stranger?" Marina swallowed the piece of bread she was chewing and thought about how to answer. She could lie, invent a less pathetic story. But Rose had kind eyes, the kind of person who saw through polite lies. "I don't have family," she said simply. "My mother passed away a few years ago, and since then it's just me. I work a lot, but I don't have time to make real friends, you know, the kind who invite you to important things. When I saw the invitation, I thought that in the worst case, it would be another night alone, but in a different place. In the best, I might find something I didn't know I was looking for." Rose completely stopped what she was doing and came over to Marina. She placed her wrinkled but warm hand over Marina's and squeezed it gently. "You have fair courage that many people don't, dear. To accept the unknown, to risk disappointment, just for the chance that something good might happen. That's rare. And you know what? I think Mr. Ashworth needed someone like you. Someone who isn't afraid to be true." The words touched Marina deeply. She felt her eyes sting but blinked quickly to hold back the tears. She didn't want to cry again. She had cried more in the last 12 hours than in the last few months. But there was something liberating in it, in allowing herself to feel without having to protect herself all the time. Rose went back to work, and Marina finished her coffee in comfortable silence. When she was done, she helped the housekeeper wash the dishes, despite the protests. She needed to do something with her hands. She needed to feel useful. She couldn't just be served without contributing in some way. It was then that Benedict appeared in the kitchen, dressed as always in his impeccable suit, even though it was a holiday. He smiled when he saw Marina and gave a small bow that made her blush. "Good morning, Miss Stewart. I hope you rested well, Mr. Ashworth asked me to inform you that he is in the music studio, on the other side of the house. If you wish to find him, I can show you the way." Marina hesitated. She didn't want to interrupt Robert, but she also didn't know if she should wait or if she should simply leave. She decided it would be polite to at least say goodbye in person before departing. She nodded to Benedict, who indicated the way with an elegant gesture. They walked through corridors Marina didn't know, past an enormous library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, and finally reached a dark wooden double door. Benedict knocked lightly and opened it without waiting for an answer, signaling Marina to enter. The music studio was unlike any other room she had seen in the house. The walls were lined with wooden acoustic panels, and instruments were everywhere. A magnificent grand piano occupied the center of the room, its black varnish reflecting the light streaming through the tall windows. There were also guitars hanging on the wall, a violin in its open case, some flutes carefully arranged on a table, and shelves full of meticulously organized sheet music. Robert was sitting at the piano, his back straight, his fingers resting on the keys without pressing them. He wore light linen trousers and a white shirt with rolled-up sleeves. He seemed lost in thought, looking at an open sheet music in front of him, but not really seeing it. "Sorry to interrupt," Marina said softly. Robert turned, and his face lit up when he saw her. "You're not interrupting anything. I was just trying to remember how to do this," he said, indicating the piano. "It's been years since I truly played. I sit here sometimes, but I rarely produce any sound worth hearing." Marina fully entered the studio, fascinated. "You play piano and all these other instruments?" Robert shrugged. "I learned as a child. My mother insisted that music was important for the soul. My father thought it was a waste of time, but she was stubborn on that point. After she passed, I continued playing for a while, as a way to keep her alive somehow. But over the years, I stopped. It became too painful." Marina approached the piano and lightly ran her fingers over the keys, producing a few disconnected sounds. "I always wanted to learn, but I never had money for lessons or an instrument. My mother used to sing sometimes, nothing professional, just songs while she worked. I loved listening." "Would you like me to play something?" Robert offered, surprising himself with the suggestion. "Something simple. I don't promise it will be good." Marina smiled and nodded, sitting on a nearby bench. Robert hesitated for a moment, as if gathering courage, and then began to play. The melody that emerged from the piano was soft, melancholic, but beautiful. His fingers moved with a memory of their own, as if his body remembered even when his mind tried to forget. It was a song that told a story of loss and longing, but also of timid hope hidden in the higher notes. When he finished, the silence that followed was filled with contained emotion. Marina had tears in her eyes again, and Robert looked at his own hands on the keys as if he didn't recognize them. "It was beautiful," Marina said. "Sad, but beautiful. Is it yours?" Robert nodded. "I composed it a long time ago, never finished it. Something was always missing, but I never knew what. Perhaps it was the courage to finish it, to admit what the music was trying to say." Marina stood up and walked to the sheet music stand. She looked at the lined paper sheets with curiosity, not understanding the symbols, but admiring the visual beauty of those organized scribbles. It was then that she found an open folder with several incomplete scores. She picked one up and saw that it had musical notes written, but also blank spaces, and at the top, an attempt at lyrics that had been crossed out several times. "Is this yours too?" she asked, showing him the sheet music. Robert approached and looked. "Ah, yes. I tried to write a complete song once, with lyrics and everything. But I found that I'm not good with words. The notes come easily, but putting feelings into words has always been my weakness." Marina looked at the crossed-out verses. They spoke of loneliness, of invisible walls, of wanting to connect but not knowing how. They were raw, honest, but clearly written by someone who was struggling to express themselves. Without thinking much, she picked up a pencil that was on the table and in the margin of the sheet music began to write. Robert watched in silence, curious. Marina wrote slowly, thinking about each word, her tongue appearing slightly at the corner of her mouth in concentration. It took a few minutes, but when she finished, she handed the sheet music back to him. "I don't know if it's good," she said shyly. "But it was what I felt when I heard the melody you just played, as if the music was asking for these words." Robert began to read. The verses were simple but powerful, speaking of finding light in unexpected places, of two lost souls recognizing each other in the darkness, of cracks that let the light in instead of just weakening. Each line seemed to capture exactly what he had tried to express in music, but never managed to put into words. He felt something stir in his chest, an emotion so strong he had to sit down. He looked at Marina with an expression of astonishment and gratitude. "You understood," he said, his voice hoarse. "You understood what I was trying to say. How did you do that?" Marina sat beside him on the piano bench. "I don't know. I guess when you feel the same things, you recognize them in others. Your music speaks of loneliness, but also of wanting to connect. It's what I feel too, so when I heard it, it was as if you were translating something I already knew. I just didn't have the words to express." Robert looked at the sheet music again, reading and rereading the verses Marina had written. It was perfect. It was exactly what was missing. And it had come from her, from this young woman who had entered his life less than 24 hours ago, but who seemed to understand him in ways no one else ever had. He was about to say something, to thank her, or perhaps confess how much that gesture meant to him, when they heard a loud knock on the main door of the mansion. The sound echoed through the corridors, urgent and insistent. Robert frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone, especially on Christmas Day. Benedict appeared in the studio, his expression worried. "Mr. Ashworth, it's Dr. Miller, the lawyer. He says it's urgent." Robert felt a knot in his stomach. The family lawyer never appeared unannounced, and certainly not on a holiday. He stood up, apologized to Marina, and went to the main hall. Marina stayed in the studio, looking through the half-open door, not wanting to be intrusive, but inevitably hearing the conversation that followed. Dr. Miller was a middle-aged man, dressed in a dark suit, even though it was Christmas Day, his leather briefcase always in his hand. He had the serious expression of someone bringing bad news and knowing it. "Robert, I apologize for appearing like this, but I needed to speak in person. It's about the clause in your uncle's will. I received a report from the estate staff as stipulated in the terms. It states that you had company on Christmas Eve, a visitor who remained in the house." Robert stiffened. His face lost the softness Marina had seen in recent moments and returned to its mask of control and distance. "How dare you send spies into my own home?" "They weren't spies, Robert. It's in the contract. Your uncle stipulated that there would be verification of the conditions, and the condition was clear, to spend Christmas completely alone. Any visit, any company would invalidate the clause, and you would lose the right to the additional £5 million of the inheritance." Robert laughed, but it was a bitter, humorless laugh. 5 million. As if that makes a difference. As if my uncle, even dead, couldn't resist one last form of control. "I'm not here to judge your uncle's decisions," the lawyer continued, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm here to inform you that, according to the terms, you have chosen not to comply with the clause. The amount will be reverted to charities as specified in the will. I just need you to sign the documents formalizing this." Marina, hidden in the studio, felt as if cold water had been thrown over her. 5 million. Robert was losing £5 million because of her, because she had accepted that insane invitation, because she had stayed due to the storm, because she hadn't left as soon as possible. Guilt came like a wave, overwhelming and suffocating. Robert took the papers the lawyer extended, but didn't sign them immediately. He looked at the document with an indecipherable expression. What if I say it was worth it, that I prefer to have had a night of genuine company than a few more million in a bank account that is already too full? The lawyer blinked, surprised. Mr. Ashworth, it's £5 million. Are you sure about this? For the first time in decades, Robert replied with absolute certainty. I am. My uncle wanted to punish me, to force me to be alone as he was. But you know what I discovered? That loneliness isn't strength. It's just fear disguised, and I'm tired of being afraid. He signed the documents firmly, each letter a declaration of independence. The lawyer put away the papers, still clearly confused by the decision, said a brief goodbye, and left. Robert stood in the hall after the door closed, staring into space, processing what he had just done. Marina couldn't stay hidden. She emerged from the studio with quick steps, her face pale. Robert, I heard everything. You lost $5 million because of me, because I stayed here. I didn't know, I never wanted to cause this. Robert turned to her and saw the panic in her eyes. He went to Marina and held her shoulders gently but firmly. It wasn't your fault, it was my choice. I knew the consequences and I chose anyway, because for the first time in years, I chose what truly matters instead of what is expected of me. But it's a lot of money, Marina was almost crying. $5 million, you don't know me, I'm nobody. How can you give up so much for a stranger? You're not a stranger, Robert said, and there was an intensity in his voice that made her stop talking. Not after this night. Not after everything we talked about, the glass bell, the music, the words you wrote perfectly, understanding what I never managed to express. You saw me, Marina. Truly, and that is priceless. But Marina was overcome with guilt. She shook her head, tears beginning to fall. I can't accept this. I can't be the reason you lose so much. I need to leave now. She turned and began to walk towards the door. Robert followed her, trying to argue, but Marina was determined. She ran up the stairs, entered the room where she had spent the night, grabbed her old bag, and came back down, all in a matter of minutes. Benedict and Rose appeared, alarmed by the commotion, but Marina barely looked at them. Marina, please. Robert blocked the door with his body. Don't do this. Don't run away just because things got complicated. Complicated? Marina was openly crying now. You just lost £5 million because of me. That's not complicated, it's catastrophic. I can't stay here knowing this. I can't be this burden on your life. You are not a burden, Robert insisted, and there was desperation in his voice now. You are the first good thing to happen in this house in decades. Don't make me go back to that loneliness. Not now that I know there's another way to live. But Marina was blinded by guilt. She gently but firmly pushed Robert aside and opened the door. Outside, the sun shone brightly, a cruel contrast to the emotional storm they both faced. She descended the entrance steps and began to walk down the stone path towards the gate. Robert followed her, but something prevented him from physically running after her. Perhaps it was respect for her decision. Perhaps it was the fear of showing himself even more vulnerable. He stood at the door watching her walk away, feeling something precious slip through his fingers. Marina reached the gate, which opened automatically upon detecting her presence. She turned one last time to look at the mansion. She saw Robert standing there, a solitary figure against the imposing backdrop of the house, and almost turned back, almost. But then she thought of the $5 million, the absurd disproportion between who she was and what he was sacrificing, and she turned her back. She walked out onto the elegant, silent street, without looking back again. Chapter 5. Robert stood at the mansion door for a time he couldn't measure. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time had lost its meaning. He watched the gate through which Marina had disappeared, the empty, sunny street, and felt a strange paralysis take over his body. It was as if he were trapped in a bad dream, one of those where you want to run but your legs won't obey, where you want to scream but your voice won't come out. It was Benedict who roused him from that trance. The old butler placed a hand on Robert's shoulder with unusual firmness, almost shaking him. Mr. Ashworth, are you going to stand there or are you going after her? Robert turned to face him, and Benedict saw something in the eyes of the man he had served for 3 decades. Fear. Real, raw, undisguised fear. "And you, for the first time, are you going to fight for something that truly matters, or are you going to let pride win again?" The words were like a slap, painful but necessary. Robert blinked, processing, and then something inside him broke. The paralysis gave way to a desperate urgency. Without saying anything, he began to run. He descended the entrance steps, crossed the garden, passed through the gate that was still open. His bare feet touched the warm asphalt, but he barely felt it. He wore only the linen trousers and white shirt he had put on that morning, shoeless, without thinking about appearances, or what the neighbors might think seeing the Millionaire Robert Ashworth running barefoot through the streets of Belgravia. He looked both ways down the street, trying to guess which direction Marina had taken. He chose to follow towards the main avenue, where he knew buses passed. She was on foot. She couldn't have gone far. He ran with a determination he hadn't felt in decades, his lungs burning, his heart beating wildly, not only from the physical exertion, but from the emotional urgency that consumed him. The streets were practically deserted because it was Christmas Day. Some families were leaving their homes for visits, looking curiously at the man running barefoot, but Robert didn't care. For the first time in his life, he didn't care what they thought of him. All that mattered was finding her, reaching her before she completely disappeared from his life. He turned a corner and finally saw her. Marina was about 200 meters away, walking fast but clearly without a clear direction, her old bag swinging on her shoulder, her posture stooped as if carrying an invisible but crushing weight. Robert quickened his pace, shouting her name. "Marina, please, wait!" She heard. He saw her shoulders stiffen, her steps falter, but she didn't stop. She sped up, almost running now, as if fleeing him was the only option left to her. Robert felt his desperation grow. He ran faster, ignoring the pain in his feet, which were beginning to bleed slightly from small cuts on the rough asphalt. "Marina, for God's sake, just listen to me." But Marina kept walking, tears streaming freely down her face, her breath catching. She didn't want to stop. Stopping would mean facing him. Facing him would mean feeling everything again, and she wasn't sure she could bear it. It was easier to run away, to disappear, to go back to her small, safe life where no one lost millions because of her. Robert finally caught up to her. He stood in front of her, blocking her path, panting, sweating, his hair disheveled, his feet bleeding. Marina tried to move around him, but he gently held her arms, not with force but with a firmness that said he wouldn't let her go so easily. "Marina, please, just give me 5 minutes. 5 minutes, and if after that you still want to leave, I won't stop you. But let me speak. Let me explain." Marina kept her gaze on the ground, refusing to look at him. Tears dripped onto the asphalt between them, small dark spots that disappeared almost instantly under the strong sun. "There's nothing to explain, Robert. You lost 5 million because of me. 5 million. No matter what you say, it doesn't change that fact. I can't live carrying that guilt. I can't be the reason you give up so much." Robert took a deep breath, trying to organize his thoughts, the emotions overflowing chaotically. "Do you think it's about the money? Do you really think 5 million makes any difference in my life? Have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, Marina. I live alone in a mansion that could house 50 people. I have bank accounts that only grow without me having to do anything. Money was never the problem. The problem was always not having anything that was truly worth buying." "But it's a lot of money," Marina insisted, finally looking up to face him. "It's £5 million, Robert. It could change lives. It could help hundreds of people, and you lost all that for a single night with a stranger." Robert held her face between his hands, forcing her to keep her gaze fixed on his. "You're not a stranger, not anymore. And it wasn't just one night, it was the first time in years that I felt truly human. The first time someone looked at me and saw a person, not a bank account. The first time I had an honest conversation about things that matter. Do you think that's not worth 5 million? It's worth infinitely more." Marina shook her head, her tears renewed. "You don't really know me. You don't know anything about me beyond what I told you in a few hours. You're idealizing all this because you were lonely. But what about when the novelty wears off? When you realize that I'm just an ordinary girl, without formal education, without culture, without anything that can really add to your life. You'll regret it. You'll look back and realize you threw away a fortune for nothing. Marina's words were cutting, but Robert saw through them. He saw the fear that motivated them, the deep insecurity of someone who had spent their entire life being invisible, of someone who never truly believed they could be valuable to anyone. He recognized that fear because he carried a similar one, only disguised as cynicism and isolation. "Do you want to know what I see when I look at you?" Robert asked, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. "I see someone who had the courage to cross an entire city for a vague promise of change. I see someone who works 3 jobs and still holds on to the hope that life can be different. I see someone who looked at a score I struggled for years to complete and in minutes found the exact words that were missing. I see someone who understands me in ways no one else ever has. And you want me to believe that has no value?" He pulled her closer, their foreheads almost touching now, and continued, each word laden with an emotion he had long forbidden himself to express. "I've lived 53 years, Marina. 53 years of having everything money can buy and nothing that truly matters. Empty relationships, superficial conversations, people who smile at me but only see what they can gain. And then you appear, expecting nothing, wanting nothing, just being genuine. And for the first time I felt alive, truly alive. Do you think I'm going to let that slip away because of money?" Marina was sobbing now, her body trembling with the intensity of her emotions. "But what if I ruin everything? What if I'm not enough? What if you realize you made a terrible mistake?" Robert smiled, a sad but tender smile. "Then we'll ruin it together. We'll make mistakes together. We'll find out if this is real or if it's momentary madness, but we'll do it without running away, without giving up before even trying. Because I'm tired of living safely. I'm tired of choosing the path that doesn't hurt. I'd rather risk getting hurt, for real, than continue to be as numb as I've been all these years." They stood there in the middle of the sidewalk, 2 strangers who in less than 24 hours had become essential to each other in ways neither of them fully understood. People passed by, some looking curiously, but at that moment they were the center of their own universe. Nothing else existed beyond that confrontation of fears and hopes. Marina finally gave in. She let Robert embrace her, and she hugged him back, holding on tight as if he were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning too fast. They cried together there, not caring who saw, not caring about appearances. They were 2 people breaking at the same time, but breaking together, and there was something strangely comforting in that. When they finally pulled apart, both their faces were wet with tears, their eyes red, their clothes rumpled. Robert looked around and realized where they were. There was a bus stop a few meters away, with a metal bench under a simple shelter. He gestured with his head and they walked over, sitting side by side, their shoulders lightly touching. Marina looked at Robert's feet and saw the blood. "You're hurt," she said with concern. "You ran barefoot." Robert looked at his own feet as if seeing them for the first time. "I didn't even feel it," he admitted. "I was just thinking about reaching you before you disappeared." She took his hand, intertwining their fingers, and they sat in silence for a few minutes. The sun continued to shine brightly. A few people passed by on the deserted holiday street, and at the bus stop, 2 completely different worlds began to find a way to coexist. "Robert," Marina said finally, "I need you to understand one thing. I didn't come for money, I didn't come for security or to improve my life materially. I came because I was alone and wanted to believe that the world still held good things. And I found you. And it was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. But I can't stay if it's just out of pity or your loneliness. I need it to be real. I need to know that I'm not just a project, a way for you to feel less guilty for having so much." Robert turned completely to her, holding both her hands now. "It's not pity, Marina. It's not a project, it's recognition. It's finding someone who speaks the same emotional language as you, even coming from completely different realities. I don't know what this will become. I don't know if it's love, or if it's just deep connection, or if it's something else that doesn't have a name yet. But I know it's real. I know I care about what happens to you. I know I want to see you tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, and discover who we are when we're together. And the 5 million, Marina asked softly. Robert shrugged. They'll go to charity, as was in the will. Perhaps my uncle did some good unintentionally. He forced me to choose between money and humanity, and I chose humanity. It was the first truly good thing I did with his inheritance. He wanted to punish me, but he ended up freeing me. Marina smiled for the first time since she had run out of the mansion. It's quite ironic, isn't it? It is, Robert agreed, returning the smile. And you know what else? I'm going to make this public. I'm going to announce that I renounced the clause because I chose not to spend Christmas alone. I won't give details about you. I won't expose your privacy. But I will make it clear that it was a conscious choice, that I prefer human connection to any amount of money, that my uncle was wrong to believe that loneliness is strength. That's going to cause a stir, Marina observed. London society will have something to talk about for months. Robert laughed, a genuine laugh that surprised both of them. Let them talk. I've spent my whole life worried about what people think of me, molding my behavior to meet expectations. I'm tired. I want to live for real, even if it means being the subject of gossip, even if it means disappointing people who never really cared about me anyway. They sat there, watching time pass, talking about everything and nothing. Robert told more about his childhood, about the pressure of carrying an important surname, about how he learned early on that showing emotion was unacceptable. Marina told about the difficult years after her mother passed away, about how she had to grow up too fast, about the exhausting jobs and the moments when she almost gave up. It was then that a bus stopped at the stop. The driver opened the door and looked at them with curiosity. "Are you getting on?" Marina looked at Robert, a silent question in her eyes. He understood what she was asking. It was a choice. She could get on that bus, go back to her life, leave all this behind like a beautiful but impossible dream. Or she could stay, take a risk, see where this could lead. Robert said nothing. He wasn't going to force her, wasn't going to manipulate her with pretty words or empty promises. The decision had to be hers, completely hers, or it would be worth nothing. Marina looked at the bus, at the waiting driver, at the route that would take her back to her rented room, to her safe and predictable routine. Then she looked at Robert, at the man who had run barefoot through the streets after her, who had chosen to lose 5 million instead of returning to loneliness. She saw in his eyes everything she herself felt: fear, hope, vulnerability, courage. "I won't be getting on," she said to the driver, "but thank you." The driver shrugged and closed the door. The bus departed, leaving a light cloud of smoke and the sound of the engine fading in the distance. And they stayed there, together, having just made the most important decision of their lives, without fanfare, without excessive drama. Just a simple but profound choice to stay, to try, to believe. Robert held Marina's face between his hands again, and this time there were no tears. There was only a quiet certainty that they were doing the right thing, even without guarantees, even without knowing what tomorrow would bring. "Shall we go home?" he asked. Marina nodded and realized that for the first time in years, the word home didn't just bring her the image of a lonely small room. It brought the idea of a place where she was seen, where she was important, where her presence made a difference. Whether for a day, a week, or forever, that was already more than she had had in a long time. They got up and started walking back. Robert limped slightly because of his injured feet, and Marina insisted that he lean on her. They walked slowly, without rushing, enjoying the sun that was beginning to set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The streets of Belgravia were emptier than ever, and they felt like the only inhabitants of a world that had been made especially for that moment. When they arrived back at the mansion, they found Benedict and Rose waiting anxiously in the front garden. The old butler had tears in his eyes upon seeing them together, holding hands, and Marina realized how much that man had risked by sending those invitations. He had bet not only on the possibility of someone showing up, but on the possibility that someone could change everything. "Thank you, Benedict," Marina said, letting go of Robert's hand to hug the butler. "Thank you for sending me that invitation, for believing it was worth trying." Benedict hugged her back, holding her tight like a grandfather would hug a beloved granddaughter. "I knew it, dear. The moment I saw you at the door, I knew it was you, the right person at the right time for the right reason." Rose also came to hug her and then insisted on tending to Robert's injured feet. She led them inside, made Mr. Ashworth sit while she cleaned and bandaged the cuts with maternal care. Marina watched, touched by the way these people who barely knew her already treated her like family. Afterward, when Rose finished, Robert led Marina back to the music studio. He picked up the sheet music where she had written the verses that morning and sat at the piano. "Look," he said, "I'm going to play the complete song now, with your words. I want you to hear how it turned out." Marina sat on the same bench as before and waited. Robert began to play, and this time the melody didn't seem incomplete. The verses Marina had written fit perfectly with the notes, creating a song that spoke of losses and encounters, of cracks that let the light in, of two souls recognizing each other in the darkness. It was beautiful, painful, and hopeful at the same time. When he finished, Marina was crying again, but these were different tears. They were tears of someone who feels part of something bigger, who contributed to creating something beautiful, who is no longer invisible. Robert turned to her and saw those tears and understood their meaning. "This song is ours," he said. "It's not mine, it's not yours. It's ours. Like everything we will build from now on. Together." Marina nodded, unable to speak. She approached the piano and placed her hands on the keys next to his. She didn't know how to play, but she felt the importance of that gesture, of touching the instrument that produced that music that somehow told their story. The rest of the day passed in a quiet haze. They dined together again, but this time the large dining table was abandoned in favor of the smaller kitchen table, where Rose insisted they sit while she and Benedict served the meal. Conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by comfortable silences and complicit smiles. They no longer spoke of money, inheritances, or clauses. They spoke of musical tastes, of books they liked, of small childhood memories they held dear. When night fully arrived, Robert offered Marina the same room as the previous night, but this time there was no storm forcing the situation. It was a conscious choice by both of them to prolong that suspended time, not to return yet to the reality that awaited them outside. Before separating for the night, they stood for a moment in the hall under the crystal chandelier that shone softly. Robert held Marina's hands and looked into her eyes with a seriousness that made her hold her breath. "Marina, I know it's early. I know we barely truly know each other. But I want you to know that this isn't temporary for me. It's not a whim or a rebellious phase against my past. It's real. You are real. And I want to discover what we can build together, without rush, but also without fear." Marina squeezed his hands in hers. "I want that too. I'm scared, I won't lie. I'm terrified of waking up and finding out it was just a dream. But I'd rather be scared and try than live safe and alone as I have until now." They embraced there, a long hug that was neither sexual nor rushed. It was just two human beings holding each other, supporting each other, creating a fragile but real foundation for something that was only just beginning. When they finally parted and each went to their room, Marina lay down on the comfortable bed and thought about how she had woken up that morning without imagining the day would be so intense. She had fled out of guilt, had been caught by a man running barefoot, had made the decision to stay even without guarantees. And now she was there, in that huge house, no longer an intruder, but as someone who belonged, at least for now. In the next room, Robert lay down and looked at the ceiling, a soft smile on his lips. He had lost £5 million. He had publicly renounced a fortune. He had run barefoot through the streets of Belgravia like a lovesick fool. And he regretted nothing. Not a penny, not a second, not a single decision, because he had gained something money could never buy, the possibility of being truly happy. Chapter 6. 3 years had passed since that Christmas night that changed everything. Marina woke to the soft morning light entering through the bedroom window that was now truly hers, no longer as a guest but as a legitimate resident of that house she had learned to call home. She turned in bed and saw Robert still sleeping beside her, his face relaxed, a peace he had never had before etched in every line of his expression. She watched him for a moment, still marveling at the fact that this was real, that it hadn't been a dream from which she would wake up back in her cramped room. The 3 years had been a journey of transformation for both. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been without obstacles, but it had been real and profound in ways neither of them had imagined possible on that first night. In the first few months after Christmas, Marina continued working her jobs. She insisted on it, even with Robert offering financial support. She needed to maintain her independence, her identity. She didn't want to be seen as someone who had been saved by a rich man. Robert respected her decision, understanding that this was fundamental to her self-esteem. But gradually, as the relationship deepened and trust grew, Marina allowed herself to accept help to take the technical course she had always dreamed of. She studied administration and event management, discovering a natural talent for organizing and connecting people. Robert, in turn, began to open up to the world in ways that surprised even himself. He returned to playing the piano regularly, no longer as a painful memory of the past, but as a form of expression and joy. He reconnected with some acquaintances who, contrary to what he imagined, valued his genuine friendship and not just his connections. He learned to distinguish between those who truly cared and those who merely orbited his fortune. But the biggest change came with the Christmas dinners. In that first year after the improbable encounter, Marina timidly suggested they repeat Benedict's invitation, but in a more organized way. Robert hesitated at first, still protective of his privacy, but seeing her eyes light up with the idea, he gave in. They sent invitations to shelters, community centers, and churches in deprived areas. They promised nothing more than a hearty dinner and a moment of celebration. 50 people attended that first year. Lonely people, struggling families, elderly people who had no one left. The mansion filled with life, with laughter, with shared stories. And something magical happened. Robert, who had always felt uncomfortable in large groups, found himself genuinely interested in the stories of those people. He talked to a 70-year-old man who had been a musician in his youth. He listened to a young single mother tell about her struggles and hopes. He hugged children who ran through the garden as if it were a park. And at the end of that night, when everyone left carrying packed meals with leftovers prepared by Rose, Robert looked at Marina and simply said, "Let's do this every year." And they did. In the second year, 100 people attended. In the third, 200. The mansion no longer accommodated so many people, so they set up tents in the garden. Marina coordinated everything with an efficiency and care that impressed everyone. She knew many people by name, remembered their stories, asked about their children and their dreams. She had transformed that dinner into something much greater than a charity event. It was a true gathering of humanities, a space where rich and poor, lonely individuals and families all sat at the same table without hierarchies. The press began to notice. Stories emerged about the millionaire who had renounced a fortune for not spending Christmas alone and who now opened his home to hundreds of strangers. Some speculated about Marina, about who the mysterious woman by his side was, but Robert and Marina kept the details private. They shared the mission, not the intimacy. That morning, 3 years after their first meeting, Marina got out of bed carefully, so as not to wake Robert, and went to the window. She looked at the garden where in a few hours preparations for another dinner would begin. This year, they expected 300 people. They had hired extra help, but Marina made a point of being involved in every detail. She went down to the kitchen where Rose was already working. The housekeeper had become more than an employee. She was practically family. Just like Benedict, who at 71 remained active and now supervised a small team of assistants they hired for the events. "Good morning, my dear," Rose greeted her with a warm smile. "Did you sleep well? Today will be a busy day." "I slept great, and I'm excited. Every year this dinner gets more special, doesn't it?" "It does indeed, and it's all thanks to you. It was your idea, your heart in this initiative that made it grow like this." Marina accepted the coffee Rose offered her. "It wasn't just my idea. It was Benedict who started it all by sending those invitations, and Robert, who agreed to open his house, his heart, I just helped organize." Rose smiled knowingly. "You did much more than organize, dear. You brought life to this house. You brought purpose. Mr. Ashworth is a completely different man from what he was, and that is to your credit." Before Marina could respond, Robert appeared in the kitchen, already casually dressed for the workday ahead. He approached her and kissed her on the top of her head, a daily gesture but laden with affection. "Good morning. Have you started planning yet?" "Always," Marina replied with a smile. "The first van with food donations arrives in an hour. Volunteers start arriving at noon, and guests from 6 in the evening." Robert poured himself coffee and sat beside her at the counter. In the last 3 years, that kitchen counter had become their favorite place. There they talked about everything, planned, dreamed, sometimes just sat in comfortable silence. It was a space of intimacy that contrasted with the formal grandeur of the rest of the house. "There's something I want to do this year," Robert said. "Something special, a kind of new tradition." Marina looked at him with curiosity. "What did you have in mind?" Robert got up and went to the music studio, returning with a wooden box that Marina immediately recognized. It was the box where they kept the old Christmas ornaments. He opened it and took out the glass bell, the one that had connected their stories in a way as impossible as it was perfect. "Remember when you found this bell?" Robert asked. "And we discovered that our mothers had examples from the same rare collection." "How could I forget?" Marina replied, her eyes already moist with the memory. "I had it restored," Robert revealed, turning the bell so she could see it. The crack was still there, impossible to completely erase, but now it was filled with a special material that contained gold particles. The Japanese technique of kintsugi, where cracks are repaired with gold, making the object more valuable and beautiful precisely where it was broken. Marina took the bell with both hands, admiring how the light reflected in the gold that traced the crack. It was beautiful in a way it wasn't before. The imperfection hadn't been hidden, it had been highlighted, transformed into art. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's our story, isn't it? Two broken people who met and transformed their cracks into something beautiful." "Exactly," Robert agreed, "and I want this year for us to place this bell at the top of the dinner tree, as a symbol that everyone there, every person who comes, brings their own cracks, and that doesn't make them less valuable. It makes them more human, more real." Marina hugged Robert, the bell still held between them. They stayed like that for a moment, Rose discreetly watching with a maternal smile. Those two had found in each other exactly what they needed, not someone to complete them, but someone to walk alongside, accepting imperfections and celebrating the journey. The day proceeded with intense but organized activity. Volunteers arrived, mostly acquaintances from previous dinners, who now returned not only to receive but to help. They set up tents in the garden, arranged long tables, decorated with flowers and lights. The Christmas tree was placed in a central, enormous and majestic position, and at the top, with special care, Robert and Marina together placed the restored bell. It shone under the lights, the golden lines of the crack visible and beautiful. Marina circulated among everyone, checking details, adjusting arrangements, but mostly talking. She knew many people by name. Mrs. Geraldine, who came every year with her grandchildren, Mr. Arthur, who had been homeless and now worked as a doorman in a building, Juliana, who a year ago was unemployed and now had a steady job. Every story was important to her. Every person was seen. Robert, surprisingly for anyone who had known him in the past, did the same. He talked, he listened, he showed genuine interest. He had learned something fundamental. That human connection had nothing to do with social class or bank accounts. It had to do with presence, with attention, with recognizing the humanity in others. When it was time for dinner, 300 people filled the mansion and the garden. Children ran between the tables, adults chatted animatedly, and the elderly were treated with special care. Rose and the kitchen team had prepared a feast worthy of celebration. Turkey, ham, rice, stuffing, various salads, fruits, and desserts of all kinds. No one would leave hungry. Before they started serving, Robert asked for attention. The chatter subsided, and he stood beside Marina, holding her hand. He wasn't good at public speeches, but in recent years he had learned to express himself better. "Welcome," he began, his voice firm but warm. 3 years ago, on this very date, I planned to spend Christmas completely alone. I had convinced myself that it was what I wanted, what I deserved. But a wise and stubborn employee had another idea. He sent 50 invitations around the city, believing that someone needed company as much as I did, even without me admitting it. Only one person came. One person was brave enough to accept a mysterious invitation from a stranger. Robert looked at Marina, and she smiled through the tears that were beginning to form. And that single person changed everything. She taught me that loneliness isn't strength, it's fear. She taught me that showing vulnerability is courage. She taught me that real connections are infinitely more valuable than any fortune. That's why you are all here today. Because I learned that this house isn't mine. It belongs to all of us. It's a place where everyone is welcome, where everyone is important, where no one needs to be alone. People began to applaud, some openly crying. Marina also had tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of gratitude and joy. Benedict, standing discreetly in a corner, wiped his eyes with a handkerchief, proud of what his audacity 3 years ago had generated. "Look at that bell at the top of the tree," Robert continued. "It was restored with the Japanese kintsugi technique, where cracks are filled with gold. Each of us has our cracks, losses, disappointments, scars. But these cracks don't make us less valuable. They make us human. They make us real. And when we unite, when we share our stories and our struggles, we transform those cracks into something beautiful, into gold, into connection." The silence that followed was laden with emotion. Then a small child shouted, "Can we eat now?" Everyone laughed, the emotional tension dissolving into joy, and dinner began amidst lively conversations and laughter. Marina and Robert circulated among the tables, serving, talking, hugging. At one point, Marina stopped and just observed. She saw that mansion that 3 years ago was a mausoleum of solitude, transformed into a pulsating space of life. She saw people of all kinds, from all backgrounds, sharing not just food but stories, hopes, humanity. And she felt a deep gratitude for having been brave enough to accept that mysterious invitation. Robert approached her from behind and hugged her. He saw what she was seeing and understood. "What are you thinking?" "About?" "I'm thinking it's worth it," Marina replied. "It's worth believing. It's worth risking. It's worth having faith that the world still holds magical encounters when we least expect it." Robert rested his chin on her shoulder. "Have you thought about what you're going to do next year?" Marina turned to face him, curious. "What do you mean?" Robert smiled, a smile that still held a touch of nervousness. "I'm saying I think we should make this official. Not just the dinners, but us, both of us, forever." Marina felt her heart race. Was Robert proposing to her? Here, in the middle of 300 people, on a Christmas night that echoed that first night 3 years ago. It was perfect. It was completely theirs. "Robert, are you asking me to marry you?" she asked, needing to hear it in clear words. "I am. I don't have a ring now. I haven't planned a grand romantic moment. But I looked at all this, at you circulating among the people with so much love and dedication, and I realized that I don't want to spend a single day of my life without you by my side. Will you marry me, Marina?" "Stuart?" Marina didn't need to think. "Yes, of course I will." They kissed there in the middle of the garden, surrounded by people who began to applaud when they realized what was happening. The news spread quickly among the guests, and soon everyone was celebrating not only Christmas, but also that impromptu and perfect marriage proposal. Mrs. Geraldine approached, tears streaming freely. "My dear, I'm so happy for you. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Mr. Arthur, the former homeless man, patted Robert on the shoulder. "You chose well, sir. This young lady has a heart as big as the world." And so the night continued amidst celebrations and emotions, abundant food and deep conversations. When everyone finally left, it was past midnight. The team of volunteers helped with the basic cleaning, and Marina insisted they leave the rest for the next day. Everyone was exhausted but happy. Robert, Marina, Benedict and Rose sat in the kitchen, each with a cup of tea, in comfortable silence. Benedict looked at Robert and Marina with tears in his eyes. "I never thought I'd live to see this," the old butler said. "When I sent those invitations 3 years ago, I only had hope. Hope that someone would come, hope that Mr. Ashworth would open his heart. But this," he gestured vaguely to the house, to the garden outside, to the couple in front of him, "this surpassed all expectations. You two not only found each other, you transformed lives, hundreds of lives. You started it all," Marina said. "You had the courage to do what needed to be done, even risking being fired." Robert laughed. "And I really thought about firing you that day. I was furious, but deep down I think I was just afraid that you were—" "Right, Benedict. Afraid that I really was wasting my life in self-imposed solitude." Rose got up and kissed each of them on the forehead, like a mother blessing her children. "I'm going to sleep. I'm too old for such long nights." But what a wonderful night it was. When it was just the three of them, Robert, Marina and Benedict, they sat in the living room beside the Christmas tree. The bell at the top shone softly, the golden lines of the crack capturing and reflecting the light from the candles that still burned around them. "You know what's funny?" Marina said. "My mother always said that Belle was special, that it brought protection and good memories. When she passed away, I thought the magic had gone with her. But I was wrong. The magic was just waiting for the right moment to manifest again." Robert took her hand, intertwining their fingers. "Our mothers knew something that took us years to learn, that the most valuable things are fragile, that they need care, that perfection isn't the goal, authenticity is." Benedict got up with effort, his joints complaining about his age. "I'll leave you two alone. I'm sure you have. A lot to talk about, a wedding to plan, a life to build. But before I go, I want to say one thing. You two gave me the greatest gift an old man like me could receive. You showed me that it's never too late to change, to grow, to open up to love. Thank you for that." He left, and Robert and Marina were left alone in the room. They lay down on the soft rug in front of the gently crackling fireplace, looking at the flames and occasionally at the bell at the top of the tree. "Are you scared?" Marina asked. "Of all this? Of how our lives change so quickly?" "I am," Robert admitted. "But it's a good kind of fear. It's the fear of someone who has something precious to lose. I infinitely prefer that to the emptiness of having nothing that truly matters." Marina turned to face him. "When I was at that bus stop 3 years ago about to leave, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I didn't deserve all this transformation in my life, but you ran after me, literally ran barefoot through the streets, and you made me realize that sometimes we need to accept the blessings that come, even when we don't think we deserve them." Robert kissed her forehead. "We both deserved it. We deserved a second chance. We deserved to find meaning. We deserved to discover that loneliness doesn't have to be permanent." They stayed there until the fire began to die down and sleep started to weigh on them. They went up to the room together, stopping for a moment in the hall to look at the tree one last time. The bell shone at the top, a perfect symbol of everything they had lived and everything they would still live. In the months that followed, life continued to unfold in beautiful and unexpected ways. Marina and Robert married in a simple ceremony in the mansion garden, with Benedict and Rose as main witnesses and some true friends they had cultivated over the years. No grand production, no guest list out of social obligation, just genuine love and people who truly mattered. Marina completed her studies and officially began working as the coordinator of the annual dinners, expanding the project to include other dates throughout the year. Robert resumed investing in businesses, but now with a different purpose. He focused on social enterprises, on projects that generated positive impact, on initiatives that gave opportunities to people like Marina had been, talented, but without access. Benedict continued as butler, though now more out of love for the house and the family it sheltered than from a need for work. Robert had insisted he retire with a generous pension, but the old man had been offended by the suggestion. "This is my home," he had said with unusual firmness. "It's where I belong, it's where I want to stay until my last day." And Rose, the housekeeper who had seen it all happen, continued preparing meals with the same care as always, but now for a house full of life, of visitors, of children's laughter, when Marina and Robert hosted the children of friends they had made over the years. One afternoon, 5 years after that first Christmas, Marina was in the music studio listening to Robert play. He had returned to composing, and several of the songs he now created were played at their charity events. Music that told stories of overcoming, of improbable encounters, of transformative love. When he finished playing, Marina applauded softly. "That was beautiful. Is it new?" "It is. I composed it last night when you were asleep. I was thinking about everything we've lived through, how we started as two lonely strangers and became," he paused, searching for the right word, "we became home to each other." Marina sat beside him on the piano bench. "You know what I realized? That invitation Benedict sent didn't promise anything specific. It just said that if I came, something in my life would change. And it did. It changed in ways I never could have imagined. But the most important change wasn't external. It was internal. I learned that I deserve to be seen, that my presence matters, that I don't need to make myself small to fit into spaces." Robert put his arm around her. "And I learned that vulnerability isn't weakness, that opening up to love, even with the risk of getting hurt, is the bravest thing we can do, that loneliness was a choice, not a destiny." They stayed there, side by side, in comfortable silence. Through the window, they saw the garden where preparations for that year's Christmas dinner were already beginning. It would be the 6th, and they expected more than 500 people. The initiative had grown so much that others had started to replicate the model in their own communities. Robert and Marina offered free consultation, sharing everything they had learned. "You know what's magical," Marina said. "It's that night didn't just change our lives. It changed the lives of hundreds of people who came to the dinners. It changed the life of Mr. Arthur, who found hope. It changed the life of Mrs. Geraldine, who stopped feeling invisible. It changed the lives of so many children who saw that there are adults who care." It's a ripple effect from a single act of courage. From Benedict sending the invitations, mine in accepting, yours in not sending me away that first night. "And it continues to change," Robert added. "Every year, every person who passes through here and takes a little bit of that hope with them. Every connection made, every smile shared, it's bigger than both of us. It's about what happens when we choose connection over isolation." That night, as they lay down to sleep, Marina looked out the window at the starry sky. She thought of her mother, how happy she would be to see her like this. She thought of the glass bell with its golden cracks. She thought of all the improbable moments that had led her there. And she felt a deep gratitude for having been courageous enough to say yes to that mysterious invitation so many years ago. Robert, almost asleep, murmured, "What are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that we are the bells, Robert, broken, restored, shining exactly where we were cracked, and that's beautiful. That's enough." Robert smiled in the dark. "It's more than enough, it's perfect." And so they slept, two hearts that had found in each other exactly what they needed. Not perfection, not completeness, but partnership. Not someone to fill voids, but someone to walk alongside, accepting the cracks and celebrating the restorations. Two people who proved that it's never too late to change, to open up, to believe that magical encounters still happen when we least expect them. The mansion in Belgravia was no longer a mausoleum of solitude. It was a beacon of hope, a space where everyone was welcome, where no one needed to be alone. And at the top of the Christmas tree, year after year, shone the glass bell with its golden cracks, reminding everyone that beauty often arises exactly where we were broken. Dear listeners, we hope Robert and Marina's story has deeply touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of solitude transformed into love, of cracks transformed into gold, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment marked you the most. Was it the improbable encounter on Christmas Eve? The discovery of the mysterious glass bell? Robert's barefoot run through the streets? Every day we bring intense stories like this, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, reminding us that it's never too late to change, to open up, to believe in true love. We await you in the next episode, with a new story that will touch your soul.